Thanks again for joining us. My name is Rebecca. Probably some of you already know me. I'm in sales and marketing department. We hope that you and your families are remain safe and healthy during these difficult and unusual times. From DFnet, and like many employees, we have been working remotely since the outbreak, and we are carefully considering returning to work policies. But working remotely has not stopped us for continuing to support clinical research on a decentralized basis. We are proud to be supporting several COVID-19 related research projects around the world, and we are more committed than ever to advancing the development of new therapies by continuing to support currently developing clinical trials. But before I introduce our speaker, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. I think that Eric have proactively mute you for avoiding background noise, but please, if you are not mute, mute yourself. We also invite your comments and questions, so please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speaker at any point, just type it in there, and it will either post to your speaker at that time, or it hold to the discussion portion at the end of the event. We have allowed some time for Q&A. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we will be able to share the link with you after the event is complete, and we welcome you to revisit the content for yourselves, and also of course share it with colleagues if you consider it. Today's webinar is presented by Eric Bosch, Director of Software and Development. He will walk you through the new DFdiscover 2020 features and announcements, some tips and tricks to get the most of DFdiscover, also the different integration with DFengage, which is a DFdiscover ePRO mobile solution, and also how the DFnet software support team can help you to upgrade. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over you, Eric, who is going to start the presentation. So Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can you hear me, Rebecca? If you just give me a nod. Yes, okay. Thank you. Yes, so thank you, Rebecca. It's good day, everyone, evening, morning, wherever you are. My name is Eric Bosch. I am the Director of Software Development at the DFnet Software Office located in, Dundas, Ontario, Canada. The DFdiscover 2020 release has been a rewarding and yet challenging release. We made a few changes that you'll hear about during this webinar that we've been shying away from a while because they impact virtually every part of our software. And here we go. As Rebecca mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, or please use the chat, and I would be happy to, or we would be happy to respond. Thank you. So our DFdiscover journey started with DFdiscover 2018. We did a lot of different things in 2018. We introduced the idea of eCRFs, and that meant we needed to include prompts, things that you would not see, that you would have on a piece of paper, but you would not see on an eCRF. We added the concept of grouping and screens. We added new features to site definition, so that you could indicate when a site started and ended their participation in a trial. We could indicate the anticipated enrollment for that site. All of these additions to the sites were geared towards allowing us to do more reporting and give more information back to you. The new reports that appeared in DFdiscover 2018 were built on JSON data coming from the server. They are interactive. They display content as HTML, and that HTML can be shared. So you could save that page and send it to one of your colleagues, and they could also interact with it. And you could also save the underlying content to Excel. We learned with DFdiscover 2018 release that Excel has an important place, or we were reminded with 2018 that Excel has an important place in clinical trial data management. So we added several other features to DFdiscover 2018 that leverage Excel. For example, the setup definition is now available as Excel for export. The report data that you see in our new reports is available as Excel. We also in 2018 started implementing different methods for interacting with metadata. There's a new metadata panel that allows you to see what's going on with queries and reasons all in one view, and that doesn't require pop-ups. And importantly, we added an API interface. The implementation of that is something we call DFWS. And what it does is it exposes certain features of the DFdiscover interaction, the setup information, the visit map, the database itself for read and write. It exposes all that via the API. In DFdiscover 2019, we continued to work on the API and shared that with everyone in the implementations of DFcollect and DFweb. So DFcollect and DFweb are our great examples of what you can do with the API if you want to build a solution yourself that lives inside the DFdiscover ecosystem. There were security updates, and being frank with everyone, there will always be security updates. The security industry continues to evolve, not because they want to, but because technology evolves. We're talking Internet of Things now. We've got malicious actors out in the big bad world. Technologies that used to serve us well, like SSL v3, no longer do. So we will continue to be releasing security updates, and you'll hear me talk about this a little bit later in the DFdiscover 2020 release as well. In reporting, we introduced removable windows, and you can see that in the screenshot that one of those windows in the dashboard is actually pulled out, and that allows you to interact with that window separately. There's also, the screenshot also demonstrates that you can customize your dashboard view now, where earlier the panels that you could see were completely controlled by us. You now have control over that. User-defined properties. Why would you want to do that? Well, people have often asked for, I want to keep some notes with my setup. I want to refer to things later in edit checks. I can't tell you what they are, but I know that I'll need some of them. So we added this idea in DFdiscover 2019 of user-defined properties. And what user-defined properties are or include, every data field in your setup has 20 user-definable properties. Every module instance has 20 user-definable properties. Every plate has 20 user-definable properties, and at the top level, every study has 20 user-definable properties. You will use those properties to assign static values and then reference them later in edit checks or export them. And the hope is that you can build new things by having access to these user-defined properties. Okay, so that's my quick repeat of 2018 and 2019. DFdiscover 2020. We've had feedback that our numbering of releases is not necessarily clear to everyone what's going on. This release, DFdiscover 2020, you will see it labeled or referenced as DFdiscover 2020 5.3.0. And what that really means is it's a minor release that started with DFdiscover 5.0, which was 2018. So DFdiscover 2020 is the product name, hopefully more palatable to you. And that product name has a version number underlying it that is meaningful for specifics, right? You would see this in other products as well, Word, PowerPoint, so on. It's called X, but if you need to find out specifically what version it is, you can find that in the About dialog. So DFdiscover 2020 is the 5.3.0. It is a complete release. Everything on the client side and the server side is updated. The beauty of it, and this has been true since DFdiscover 2018 with the 5.0 releases, is that earlier clients will continue to work with this. So 5.1.4, for example, the last patch of the DFdiscover 2018 releases, 5.2.1, the last patch of the DFdiscover 2019 releases, and I'm hoping you're all keeping up to date with your patches for your client tools. They will work with 5.3.0 or DFdiscover 2020 server side. Minor releases, which are this second digit, so a major release is a 5. A minor release is a 5.1, a 5.2, or a 5.3. The promise we make in minor releases is that we're not going to break features. We may offer new features that are not available in the original release, but we won't break existing features. For that to happen, where we do breaks is when we get to major releases. So the good news for you is you can upgrade to DFdiscover 2020 immediately, and your customers, your users, do not have to install the DFdiscover 2020, DFExplore, DFSend, DFadmin client tools right away. Of course, we encourage them to, because the new features that we're adding are only available to those clients. And I will talk in a few slides about a few exceptions to this, where if you want to take advantage of a new feature, you really need to go to 5.3.0. Okay, so hopefully I've managed to convince everyone that this is a great thing to do. So number one thing that we added to DFdiscover 2020 is two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication, my guess, is something that everyone has been exposed to in all of their internet activities, whether it's logging into a web portal, whether it's accessing your Office Online product, dealing with your bank. The idea of two-factor authentication has really taken off, and I would say that it has replaced almost completely the idea of password aging. Two-factor authentication is required, or when enabled, during desktop login, DFExplore, DFSend, DFadmin. It's implemented in DFweb during login. It's implemented in DFcollect during login. And in all of those cases, when your two-factor authentication login is first triggered, you will receive an email with a authentication verification code. Web is unique in the sense that you might be using DFweb in a coffee shop. You're probably not going to let people use your laptop in a coffee shop. You're probably not going to share your DFcollect tablet, but you might go to a library and use DFweb. So DFweb also offers this feature of trust my device. So if I went to a library and had to do something with DFweb, I can tell it to send me a two-factor authentication code, but don't remember it. So the next time I log in, it's going to ask again. So a few numbers. Two-factor authentication sends you a 6-digit security code that is valid for 10 minutes. If you don't use it in 10 minutes, you can ask for it again. But if somebody stumbles across it after those 10 minutes, it is not valid. Once you have successfully used two-factor authentication, logged in, and supplied a security code, that device, and that device means you and your laptop, or you and your browser, or you and your DFcollect device, that 2FA code, that authentication is now valid for 30 days. If you log in with one device and then log in with another device later, you will be asked for another 2FA code, right? Just as you would expect in implementations you've run across in other tools. And in that 30-day validity window, you can have up to 10 different devices that have been verified with 2FA codes. When the 11th one comes along, it's still allowed in, but we have effectively invalidate the 2FA code from the oldest one. So you have a rolling list of 10 devices that are 2FA authenticated. Okay, so that's a little bit about 2FA authentication. Now, some of the finer points. In order for 2FA to work in DFdiscover, the user has to have an email address. That is how we communicate with them. We send them a 6-digit security code, and as you saw on the previous slide, it is valid for 10 minutes. In all the login dialogues, the user is able to request another 2FA code. That user on that device at that address will not require another 2FA code for 30 days. Right? So if you are logging in from your desktop computer in the office and that computer does not move and it is you logging in, you will supply your 2FA code every 30 days. If you allow someone else to use your computer and they log in with their own DFdiscover credentials, they will also have to supply a 2FA code. Okay? That does not invalidate yours, but it just means that they will need to do that independently. A few places where you do not want to enable two-factor authentication. This is one of those. So DFdiscover 2018 and DFdiscover 2019, those tools do not know what to do if the server tells them, hey, here's a 2FA code, now authenticate. Okay, so you don't want to enable 2FA for users that are using 2018 and 2019 tools. Users without a known email address, you cannot assign a 2FA code to those users. User accounts that are being used to run cron jobs, there is no way to give those cron jobs a 2FA code. In fact, the way to do that is with application-specific passwords, but we have not implemented that for this release. Your best practices, I'm sure anyway, are when you're running cron jobs, you are running them as a user that is permitted via role to study, and just ensure that that user account is, does not have 2FA turned on. Simple as that. As the admin in DFdiscover 2020, you will observe that there is a new checkbox in the user definition panel that allows you to enforce request two-factor authentication. When you look at your DFadmin users list, you will notice a new column that includes the 2FA status of those users. So anyone who has it enabled, you will see the word required in that column for them. And then to remind users that 2FA is enabled for them, if they look at their user profile, they will see it as well. Right? Again, remember it's the admin that's enabling it and enforcing it, and the user supplies the code, but 15 days from now, they may forget because they haven't supplied a code. So the profile will remind them of that requirement. Okay, so that was a biggie, two-factor authentication. The next biggie is subject alias. And customers, users have asked for non-numeric subject identifiers for a few years. We've been shy, I guess, to do it because again, it impacts a lot of what is DFdiscover. The requests did not stop. Thank you everyone for continuing to ask for non-numeric subject identifiers. So we bit the bullet, and DFdiscover 2020 now allows non-numeric subject identifiers. What we did is we followed the path of what we have done for plate and visits, and that is to allow labels to go with those numbers. So when you look at your subject binder, you might see the visit number, you might see the visit label, you might see the plate number, you might see the plate label. Similar with choice and check, right? In the database, you see the numeric codes. When you look at it on screen or in exports, you will see optionally the labels. So that's the approach that we took with subject alias. Subject alias is really an optional label for that subject ID that has been with us since the beginning. Thank you, subject ID, yay numbers. And just like the subject ID, the subject alias also has to be unique. Subject alias is supported in DFExplorer, DFweb, DFcollect, and each of those applications provides a preference, whether you want to use it or not, right? So in DFExplorer, it's a preference. In DFweb, from your preferences pull down, and in DFcollect, from your preferences dialog. You can indicate whether or not you want to use the alias. Subject alias is also supported in edit checks. In the edit check, you can say, I have the ID, I'd like the alias, or I have the alias, I'd like the ID. The newest reports, meaning the DFdiscover reports that we've added since 2018, support subject alias. Command line utilities such as DFexport and its older but still loved DFexport.rpc sibling, DFSQL load, and DFSAS all support subject alias as an option. They are, however, subject alias are not supported in legacy reports. So how does a subject alias work? Well, not unlike it does for plates and visits and codes, you indicate the numeric value, which is the tried and true subject ID, and then you supply for that subject ID what the alias is. Each alias can be up to 30 Unicode characters in length, so it supports multiple languages. And most characters are allowed, but not all. Spaces, some punctuation characters are not allowed in the subject alias. Once defined, those subject aliases are then visible if you enable the preference. So here I am in DFExplorer, for example, and I am now seeing the alias T2-A-50001 in the subject binder and also in the data entry screen. And in this case, what I'm trying to show you in the slide is if I hover over the alias, I can still see the numeric subject ID. And conversely, where the subject alias is defined, if I'm looking at the subject ID and I hover over it, I see the subject alias. In list view, I can also see the subject ID. And an important thing to note here is you don't have to define a subject alias for everyone. Why you would choose to do it for some but not others, I can't comment on, but it is not required. So in this particular list view, you can see that in this case, it's actually site 2, which are the first 2 records. They have subject aliases. And then in site 3, or site 350, whichever, the subject alias is not defined, and that's okay. You still see the subject ID. Field definition in DFExplorer has morphed and improved quite a bit since 2018. And this is just a snippet of that field definition dialog. But what I wanted to show you was, just like you can get to other metadata properties, you can also get to the subject alias as a metadata property. So I can choose to show the subject ID and show the subject alias and perhaps other fields from other fields on that form or fields on other forms. The next thing we worked on, the next thing we want to talk about are this generic thing called tabular listings. We've had in the past views, we've had tasks, and the idea behind tabular listings is it's really a combination of those two. So where I specify that my criteria are generating something, I am going to call it a tabular listing, and I'm going to expose it in DFExplorer. I'm also going to make it available in the reports view and also in the command line for DF reports. Tabular listings can run, they can be shared, and they can easily be saved to Excel. So to give you an example of what's going on here. So as you're defining fields, anytime you're doing a field selection or defining a view or defining a task, you are now effectively creating a tabular listing. And those key fields are remembered and they are available later for presentation. So here in field selection, I have indicated several fields that I want, and that's going to end up building either a view or a task. And one of the nice things, and this is kudos to David Do, is that your views and your tasks can now perform inner joins and or outer joins on the data when you're going across plates. Previously, we always did, I guess, outer join, and now we're also offering inner join. So as long as the visit and ID keys match, you can collect data from across plates and present that data in the same tabular listing. Okay, so here's an example. This is actually of an outer join where I've defined a tabular listing called birth and enrollment dates. And so here's the data in list view. As you have always been able to do in list view, I can click on any row in this list and that will take me to the record in data view. Also now in reports view, and this is a shout out to Ed, you can view these as reports. So it may be a view for you in Explore or Explore data view or list view, but it's also available if you only have reports view. And you can see that the birth and enrollment dates I defined here in the left hand in the list view is available automatically in the reports view in the right hand. So that same output that appears in Explore is now available for review in reports view. And the cool thing is, one of the cool things is, when I click in the report, when I click on any of those rows, it will actually take me back to the data view of that record from my tabular listing. If you were using tasks before, your tasks are preserved and they now appear in reports under a tab called task listing. If you had views before, they are preserved and presented under tabular listing. In both cases, tabular lists can be saved to Excel, and the report view of this can be easily shared by sending, by saving to HTML and then emailing that HTML to someone. The reports view, as you can see, does not include shading of metadata. So list view still has a few additional cool features, but this is, I think, a big step forward for what we've been offering. In 2019, we introduced trend reports, and that was a recognition that a few things, query status, number of queries, how much data is being entered, changes over time. And wouldn't it be great if we could see how that change evolves? So for the trend reports, we added animation. Here, so I'm looking at the query status trend here. This is what you would have seen previously. I'm just going to pause this for a second. Whoop, missed it. Let me go back. Okay, so this is what you would see in DFdiscover 2018 or I guess 2019 if you look at query status trend, right? How many queries have, and then in this case, the study is done now, so they are all resolved. The new animation, if I continue on now and I go into my control panel and I enable animation, I get this timeline scrubber viewer at the top, right? So I've got play, stop, rewind, forward. And as I play the animation, I can now see what's going on with the relationship of resolved and outstanding queries. Okay. Sorry, I just restarted it. Let me go back. Let me go scrub ahead here. Okay, so here we are. Not surprisingly, right? We start out with a few unresolved. They get resolved, move forward. So I'm scrubbing this through by hand now, just so you're aware that it's not smooth now. And then as I get to the end of the trial, right, everything is resolved. This is a normal, healthy clinical trial and clinical data. So if I keep playing now, the challenge with this is the total number of queries continues to increase, right? And probably what I'm looking for is the relationship of the queries that I have. How many of them are unresolved versus how many are outstanding versus how many are resolved. So if I go in and change the options, which I can do on the fly as the timeline is playing, and say I want to see these values relative to each other, not absolute. So at the end, they're all resolved. And now as I back up and play the animation again, you can see that now how are the resolved versus outstanding playing against each other, right? Again, as the trial progresses, the number of resolved queries outweighs the number of outstanding queries until we get to the end where they are all resolved. Okay, so that's trend report animation. DFweb and DFcollect have had some love in DFdiscover 2020, and they also get subject aliases. They also get two-factor authentication. DFweb, this is for the programmers. DFweb is based on originally a technology called AngularJS, and Angular continues to evolve, so DFweb continues to evolve. It's been updated to Angular 8. This, you'll notice if you've been using web, will give it better interaction and load speeds, and we'll be able to do more things as Angular evolves going forward with DFweb. DFcollect is being optimized, has been optimized. It does more compression, communication back and forth with the server, and it does more intelligent caching now of what it already knows from the server. So you should notice that both of those tools, both of those API clients are sped up. Field background colors, probably a subtlety for most of us, but they now include transparency. And that's useful for CRF backgrounds where you want to match the color, but there's a pattern underneath that you need to see. So that transparency is useful there. If you are using DFNeed to change the visits or plates that are needed during the evaluation of a subject binder, to get it back to the beginning has been tricky, right? And I've seen, thank you Tadas in Seattle, I've seen examples of lots of lines of edit check code to just restore my list of visits and plates back to what I would like when I started. So DFNeed now has a new parameter called DFNeed reset that helps with that. And that's implemented in Explorer, Web, and Collect. So security updates, as I mentioned, security updates are happening all the time. One really cool thing we did, and this was pointed out to us by an auditor, and the auditor mentioned that no one basically does this. So I'm sure others have now implemented it as well, but I'm pleased to say that we are implementing failed password attempts during e-signatures as well. So if you happen to do an e-signature and failed 3 times or whatever the limit was and you got kicked out, previously we would just let you log in again, and all of our competitors would do that as well. But now failed e-signings also trigger the lockout duration, right? So whatever that timer is, even if you fail e-signing, when you try to log back in again to your DF Explorer, DF Send, DF Admin, DF Setup, they will all wait and lock you out until that timer has elapsed. TLS, the, I guess, successor to SSL, has moved on from 1.0, 1.1 to 1.2 and 1.3 now. The concept, and I'm not great with all my acronyms, but PFS, perfect forward secrecy, that ensures when you're communicating during a session, you only exchange, keys you exchange are only used once, so you don't use those again. And then HTTPS can be, in some cases, degraded to HTTP, and HSTS, welcome to the acronyms, is a technology that basically enforces the idea that you can't degrade from one to the other. It also prevents eavesdropping and man-in-the-middle attacks. Okay, so these are all fantastic security updates we've made. And if you were to go to SSL Labs, where we often visit for testing, you can look at two of our exposed websites, DFweb and explore.dfdiscover.com. And you can look at what the scores are on our servers as far as security goes. I encourage you to do the same with your DFdiscover server and or your DataFax server. And if you're not getting better than a B, you definitely want to make some changes to improve that. The other thing I'd like to encourage people to do is to stop. CDSI, Clinical Data Fax Systems, and DFnet Research now have always signed certificates that are needed for secure communication inside the DFdiscover ecosystem. We're unique in this way though, right? If you visit many other sites that are securely communicating, those certificates are not being signed by the vendor. They're being signed by well-known commercial certificate authorities or well-known commercial CAs. In earlier releases, we did not support commercial CAs. We have, for 2 releases now, supported commercial CAs. It is a little bit of extra money for you on an annual basis. And it basically is replacing that step of you sending a DFcert REQ request to DFnet. You're getting it instead from a commercial vendor. And when you look at your SSL lab score, after that, you'll notice that you immediately get an increase in your score, right? We're trusting the certificate from somebody who's well-known. And as much as I'd like to think that we are well-known, DFnet is well-known worldwide, that's not the reality. So using a commercial CA will definitely help your security score. So a few tips and tricks just to share with you. You can now in DFdiscover 2020 let your study admins define user accounts by the user's email address. And this is great if you've got multiple teams working within your DFdiscover installation and you want to keep some boundaries between them. So I can't necessarily, if I'm working on study 1 or I'm the admin for study 1 and 2, and you're the admin for study 3 and 4, I can't by default see who your users are. And conversely, they can't see who mine are. But if I know the name or I know the email address, then I can add that user to my study 1 or study 2. As you saw, inner joins, outer joins in Vue. There will be lots of new other tricks coming along. Definitely encourage you to use user-defined properties in your data exports. It's a great way to have the data value there and tag it with the additional meaning that you added in those user-defined properties. So if you're adding it there in the setup, you should be exporting it as well. I also encourage everyone to love your default DF Explorer dashboard and take a few minutes to customize it to your preferences. When you're in the reports view, if you like the way a report looks, you'll notice in DFdiscover 2019 and also in 2020 that there's a pin to dashboard option. So if I like the way a report looks, I can just pin it, and then the next time my dashboard comes up, it will be there and it will remember that for future. Okay, DFengage. So we have DFweb DFcollect. These are 2 clients that we built on the API. DFengage is our first client built on the API by someone other than DFnet. And DFengage is an ePRO app for mobile. It works on iOS, it works on Android. And it is the collaboration of our friends at Curve Tomorrow and DFnet Research. It uses our API and it is built on top of the WeGuide platform. WeGuide platform has been used in many other ePRO solutions, so it brings with it a lot of experience and expertise. Because it's integrated in DFdiscover, you are not defining ePRO questionnaires separately. You are instead identifying within within DFdiscover, which particular screens, which particular plates are relevant to an ePRO subject. You can indicate which part of the visit map is relevant to an ePRO participant. And then you use permissions to restrict which plates are exposed to ePRO subjects. That's done in DFadmin. WeGuide handles what goes on the screen in iOS and Android, on your tablet, on your mobile phone. What is the interaction? How are the notifications handled? And that's all being done by WeGuide. So I might come to my phone in the morning and there's a notification there indicating that I need to complete a questionnaire in one of your DFdiscover studies. There is no middle layer. There's no import-export step because it's talking to our API directly. The WeGuide DFengage is reading from the DFdiscover study database directly and writing to the DFdiscover study database directly. DFengage also works offline, but you can imagine, like with DFcollect, the data is not available to you if you're offline and you could not submit it. But as soon as you come back online, it is submitted. There is no separate step for you to do. It just happens. Okay, so this is actually meant to be a quick video of DFengage and DFSetup and DFadmin in action together. And when I played it this morning, this did actually crash my PowerPoint. So I'm going to skip over this. It will be available in the recorded presentation. And it is a summary, a synopsis of what we presented last month in the DFengage webinar. So I'm just gonna When you are ready to upgrade to DFdiscover 2020, our support team is here to help you. 2020 will be available for download from the website, dfnetresearch.com, in the next 2 weeks. On the exact day when it is released, we will share an email with that information. To obtain it, simply go to our homepage, software pull down, go to current release, and that will take you to DFdiscover 2020. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a minor release. So if you're already running 2018 or 2019, the upgrade is simple. All of your client tools do not have to be running DFdiscover 2020. As I mentioned, a few things like 2FA and subject alias will need 2020, but if you don't need those features, then we're okay. It is available, DFdiscover 2020 is available for Windows 10 and Mac OS Mojave and Catalina. And for those of you that are in the Windows ecosystem, you will know that in September of this year, Windows 8.1 is no longer officially supported by Microsoft. And in November of this year, High Sierra is no longer officially supported by Apple. So we're trying to be proactive and move forward, keep our operating system compatibility fresh. You all received an indication that, an email indication, our software support team, the email address has changed to now be help@dfnetresearch.com. Please email us any way we can help. Okay, so I'm gonna spend just a few minutes. What's next? There are lots of technologies. There's lots of frameworks, lots of toolkits out. And rarely have I seen a framework that has been as well adopted and is as feature rich as Flutter. So a lot of the development we're doing moving forward is based on Flutter. You can look it up, just Google it. And one of the things we like about Flutter is, from our perspective, we're writing one code that works on all these different platforms: browser, mobile, iPad, tablet. When we implement new features, we don't have to worry anymore, and you'll have them available to you immediately on all three platforms. There will be less training to do, right? You don't have to train on separate environments. All of the tools will be faster and more robust. And as I said, for us, it's a win because we can get things to you quicker and support them more efficiently. We're working on additional features to eSource collection. You have DFsend, you have DFattach, you have the ability to attach documents in all of our client tools. There are extra things we'd like to do. We want to include image capture. We want to identify things that don't have barcodes on them. We want, and when I say we want, these are feature requests we're getting from customers, the ability to redact content on the document before you send it. So this tool that we're working on, we don't have a name for it yet, but it will be available in browser and mobile. It will replace effectively and supersede what you know and love as DFsend, and there will be no install required. Study setup, we're doing lots of work to start setup optionally from C-. We're also considering implementing new additional data types: true ISO dates, true floating point values, geolocation, right? So where was I when I actually recorded this value? Conditional values. The idea behind a conditional value is that right now for a field and the following field to work together, they need to be defined as a skip pattern, what we would used to call as a skip pattern, and you probably have some edit check logic. Well, wouldn't it be great if we could simplify that into a pair or a trio of fields that just understood how to do that on their own? For eCRFs, we need rows, columns, grids of fields, static text, right? Things that you don't have on a piece of paper, or you would have on a piece of paper you no longer have. Media, so can I show you when you're doing a measurement, the actual thing that got measured? Draw lines, display calculated values, but don't store them. Ensure that we offer multi-language support going forward, right? Where we heavily relied on paper backgrounds for CRFs in our old products. Going forward, that needs to be available in eCRF immediately. And then the idea that you may actually want to have multiple users doing development for a study simultaneously, something we're working on. Finally, scheduling. When we started working with Curve Tomorrow on ePRO, the idea that you could have events repeat within a day, right? So you have to answer these questions in the morning, you have to answer these questions after your lunch, you have to answer these questions after your dinner. Our current visit map doesn't have that concept in it. Time of day scheduling. So I only want to ask this, I only want to collect this after these 3 meals. I don't want to collect it otherwise. And if you don't give me those responses, if you don't fill in those questionnaires, they expire. Right? We don't have that concept in visit maps. When something is defined as required in the visit map, it is always required. Notifications obviously are important, and to do some ad hoc reporting. And this is relevant more to us than maybe to you, but where we have conditional visits, plates, maps, cycles, we're going to implement more of that in the API or on the server. And this means if you're an API developer, all of that tricky work is being done for you rather than you having to do it yourself. Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening, learning about DFdiscover 2020.
Thank you, Eric. We have a couple of minutes for questions. I have not seen anyone yet with any question. You know, I just remember you that you have the Q&A chat box on the bottom of your screen at the Zoom application.
Oh, wait.
So
let's see
Lara is asking. Sorry if I miss this, but is DFengage replacing DFcollect? No.
They solve different problems. DFcollect is effectively clinician collected data. DFengage is subject reported data. So they will have a life separate, joined by DFdiscover in the middle.
Please submit if you have any other question to the chat box. Well, Eric, I have another one. Will DataFax 2014 to DFdiscover 2020 be able to be done as a single upgrade step? And which version of DF setup has these new features? These are two questions.
Okay, so DataFax 2014 to DFdiscover 2020, there will be one migration step, but just one. Yes, and because 2020 is a complete release, you can install it. You don't need to install 2018, 2019 in between. You can go directly from 2014 DataFax to DFdiscover 2020. Mm-hmm. The user-defined properties are actually in DFdiscover 2019. Some of the other properties are in 2019. And I do want to caution you that if you do use DFdiscover, user-defined properties in setup of 2019 or DFdiscover 2020, then you do not want to go back to DFdiscover 2018 setup, because that setup definition will not know what to do with those user-defined properties, right? Just like you would notice if you upgraded your FrameMaker to the latest version and then wanted to open that up in a previous version, it would probably throw away the things it doesn't recognize, or it might warn you that you're going to lose things. So same applies here. You do not want to go back once you have turned that on. And you do have the ability, when you define studies, to indicate what minimum version number you want to allow clients to connect with.
Mm-hmm. One last question from Chibera, and asking if it's possible to make DFadmin, DFSetup in separate packages to download, like DFExplore and DFSem?
Yes, it's a valid request. It's always a balancing act for us to put the meaningful things together that you will want to download once, and but at the same time have enough specificity and granularity that you can get things separately. So we are, as we move forward, you can infer from our Flutter discussion and our discussion about web and apps and mobile that even setup and admin will eventually migrate to the web, and as apps, they will definitely be separate.
Okay. This is the last one because we are running out of time. Well, Andres, Eric, is congratulations to all DFnet, DFdiscover 2020 versus 5.3, great new features. So thank you, Andres.
Thank you, Andres.
Yeah. We have also John Rasso asking where can I get information about having a studio admin setting up user accounts.
That will be in the release notes, John. Yeah, and the DFadmin manual.
Okay, it's already time. Thank you everybody who joined us today for the webinar. Thank you, Eric, for sharing the updates. The webinar will be available at our website, dfnetresearch.com, by the end of the day. And also we will be sharing with you the recording via email and also through our LinkedIn account. I just want to remind you that you can still sign for being a DFengage tester, so you can be enrolled as a participant. So if you want to take part of the test, please send us an email to beta@dfnetresearch.com, and we will send you the information to join. And of course, thank you all that you have already participated as a DFengage tester. Well, thank you everyone for being here and for joining us today. And I hope to see you in our next webinar. So have a great rest of the day.
Thanks everyone. Stay safe. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.